Hi, everybody, and welcome to Just Between You and Me. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Michael. And today we're going to talk about dual triggering.
Yes.
This is quite a topic for us because in our experience, I think we agree that this has been the greatest source of stress in our connection.
Yeah, this one has been the most breakdowny of the breakdowns, and the most upsetting within our connection.
Yeah.
Because we mirror each other so deeply that when something triggers me, there's a good chance that my trigger is actually going to trigger Michael's trigger.
Yeah.
And it's very frustrating when both people are in their trigger and we're attempting to take responsibility, but we're just by the nature of what's going on, we're actually talking past each other, talking around each other, not communicating. And there have been times where it's like, okay, I'm going to walk away for 10 minutes because I just need to.
Yep.
Because so much is being just not working.
Right. So I think that while taking responsibility is the ultimate antidote to dual triggering or any kind of triggering situation between us, and there's been a journey there, there's also just the nature of this dynamic here. When a trigger comes up in each of us, what we've realized that one of us has to choose to hold space for our own trigger and the other person's trigger. And that's been you a lot of the time. And I've been really learning to step up and step into that more recently, but you've done that a whole lot of the time for sure. And that's an empowered space to be in.
Yeah, it's interesting because at some point, like when I'm taking true ownership of my own triggers, and that's actually I'm just slightly more skilled in that than Michael is, just because of the nature of how we've lived our lives and the skill sets that we have. I happen to be just a little more skilled is why I do end up holding more, or up till now have held the majority of the space when both of us are triggered. Is that I'm choosing my connection over my trigger, and I've trained myself to choose my connection over my trigger. So it's like, I'm really triggered and this person's really triggered, and I can say that this is the reason why we need to go our separate ways. Like I can totally jump into that conversation, or I can say, there's reasons why I chose this connection, and I'm going to step into compassion for myself and compassion for this person. And I know that eventually I'm going to be able to process what I'm processing, but right now something's got to give. And so I'm going to step back and hold space for the 10, 15 minutes it's going to take to process through the trigger of the other person.
So you were the one giving in that case.
And then then requesting the space in return to be able to process my trigger.
Yeah. So what wasn't working for me that was creating the need for Michele to have to choose that so much is I was in a victim mentality for part of it. How was I in the victim mentality? Let that come out of me. I was really I'm going to say it like this. I wasn't in responsibility. I wasn't in taking responsibility. And we were hitting some really deep triggers for me. So while I've been so good about showing up and holding space for my own trigger and holding space for others in certain areas of my life, here was a space where I was just failing at it. And I didn't know why. And really the triggers were so deep, and I wasn't taking responsibility for them. I was in victim in the form of like blaming it on Michele or on other people or other experiences like outside of myself. And, even though I know not to do that, but there's some areas where that trigger was so powerful that to realize I was doing that there took an extra set of eyes and support and willingness to like hold space for that trigger. So there was a few of those that really came up a lot, and it was like part of this too was miscommunication. Yeah. Because I was in a space of like, hey, I'm trying to own my part of it and say what part of it I'm experiencing in you that is like you're mirroring. And that was like taking responsibility and also like assigning responsibility. Yeah. And that didn't work. And it was like, I hear you, but I don't hear you. It was like validating and disvalidating at the same time. Fair? Yeah. It was very much like in that dual triggering space, there does get to be a first and second. And sometimes it's very clear who, like if somebody got triggered
initially and then the other person got triggered afterwards, like oftentimes it's like first person triggered,
First come, first serve.
First come, first serve.
Yeah.
First person triggered is the first person we deal with.
Right.
But sometimes because of the triggering of the two individuals or the skill set of maybe one or both of the people, one person ends up holding more space for and that could be the first person triggered or it could be the second person triggered.
Yeah.
I ended up being the one who held more space because, like I said, I just happened to be a little more skilled.
Sure.
And in other connections, you were actually more skilled and you were the one holding space.
It was also a choice. I'm going to go a layer deeper here, is that part of it too is because I was choosing to not show up and suppress everything that's coming up for me and just hold space for my partner. Because that's what I always used to do. So in order to not do that, boom, I slam to the other extreme and I'm always coming up with what's inside of me. Well, that left no space for you. Yeah. So to figure out how to like do both just became a disvalidating thing and not supportive. So I was like trying different things as I'm trying to like own my trigger and support Michele and her trigger. And there were a lot of failures there. And I didn't know how to handle that. And that's where it was like you brought something to this connection that I didn't have. And that was hold space for your trigger and my own and support me first. And as I've been learning to do that in return, because I haven't had that one before, we hadn't got there in my past connections. I've been learning to what I call pour into you in return. And that's like holding space for your trigger and for me. That's like one of the ways I can pour into you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's valuable. Like just hearing your process with it is valuable from the perspective of like hearing the growth and hearing the shift and hearing the care.
Right.
Yeah. So that's really nice to hear.
Totally. Especially when like some of my previous shifts were like positive shifts, but then they still weren't working because there was more shifting to do. And it doesn't mean let go of the whole, like, I don't suppress my things. I'm not letting go of that. I'm holding space for it and Michele, and then I'm bringing that up later. Not too much, not days or months later, that doesn't come, but like literally the next 15 minutes, like, okay, hey, I need support too. Like, so I'm not suppressing, but I'm continuing to expand. Yeah.
And it's just about, it's like what you learn in kindergarten. It's time to take turns.
Yeah. For sure.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I really feel like there's such juiciness in this topic, and it has been the biggest source of breakdowns between us since the beginning.
Yeah, and therefore it's the biggest source of blessings. And our knowledge of that and our knowledge of like, there's a harmony between like, we really get to face this because if we walk away from each other, we're just going to face this in a different connection because we attracted this. That kind of wisdom, if you will, like there's patterns here that I've experienced in prior connections that I'm like, just like, can I just figure this out already?
Yeah, no, I've had the same experience of like, this is something that keeps coming up. It's the only common denominator is me, so I must be me.
So I'm going to celebrate us both for taking responsibility there.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that we're just banging our heads against the wall every day and like so stressed that we're, in our connection. Thankfully, because sometimes, a break just needs to be created when there's just so much of the same breakdown. It's like, sometimes you need some space to clear your head and to come back and start fresh.
And we've done that. We've taken 10, 15-minute breaks. Sometimes we'll take, like, if it's something that's been really, really problematic, we'll actually take a couple of days apart. Like I'll one or the other of us will take a trip and kind of give some room.
Have we done that? I think we've only thought about that.
Actually. I think we did it twice. I think it's happened twice in our connection.
Yeah.
The entirety of our connection is we've been together over a year now.
Yeah. And I think the trip was also planned with other things, so it wasn't like the sole purpose of the trip. Like the trip was coming anyway, and it was like, oh, this works to give us space as well.
Yeah.
So
I think we've done that exactly twice in our connection, but totally. It has happened. So
and it's helpful. It's like that's not a failure. That's a skill. That's a choice. It's a choice. To take that space.
Yeah. So I think that's a pretty good wrap up of our dual trigger space conversation today.
So this was the most vulnerable video I think we've made about our connection. So. Wow.
Up till this point, I'm sure there'll be more vulnerable ones to come.
For sure. But thank you all for receiving us and witnessing us in our vulnerability and what we're working through and growing through in ourselves.
So if you guys have any comments, anything you'd like to share, leave that in the comment section down below. And if you'd like to contact us via any of our social medias or email, that's in the description section down below. And we'd love to hear from you. So like, share, subscribe, and pass us on to your friends.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time. I'm Michele.
And I'm Michael.
Have a great day.
Mwah.